All right, today we are jumping into one of the most controversial topics out there, the link between immigration and crime. It's a subject that gets people really fired up, and the debate is often driven by some pretty strong emotions and, let's be honest, cherry-picked stats.
So, what is the real story? Well, as you're about to see, the answer is not simple at all. Our goal here is to get past the screaming headlines and really look at the context, the hidden factors, and the very data that this whole conversation is built on. Okay, let's get into it.
You've seen how this plays out, right? On one side, even mentioning a link between immigration and crime can lead to accusations of racism. And on the other side, you'll hear statistics about immigrants being overrepresented in crime data, but often without the whole story. We're here to unpack that whole story.
So first up, we're going to set the stage and look at why this is such a complicated question in the first place.
The first thing you really got to get is that drawing a straight line from immigration to crime is just wrong. It's super misleading. The likelihood of someone committing a crime isn't just about what country they're from. It's shaped by a whole bunch of other things that are usually way more important.
All right, Section 2. Let's start digging into the actual numbers. This is where we start to peel back the layers of the onion and see what the raw data might be hiding from us.
There are so many things that can warp the statistics. Think about economic incentives, right? A pickpocket is going to make a lot more money in a rich city like Berlin than in Tbilisi. Simple as that. Then you've got things like an immigrant's legal status, families being broken up during migration, facing discrimination in a new country, or even professional criminal gangs moving around. All of these things have a huge impact, but they never make it into a simple headline.
So, to make sense of all this, we need a tool. And a really useful one is called the comparison ratio, or CR for short. It's a pretty simple but powerful way to see if a group is involved in crime more or less than you'd expect based on their population size. If the CR is over 1, they're overrepresented. If it's under 1, they're underrepresented. Easy. So how does this actually work? Let's walk through a real example from the UK. First, you find out what percentage of the prison population belongs to a certain group, in this case, 13%. Then you find out their percentage in the general population, just 3.4%. You just divide that first number by the second, and boom, you get the CR, 3.83. That tells you, in this specific case, this group is represented in prison at a rate almost 4 times higher than in the general population. Okay, let's put this tool to work. We're going to look at some really detailed data out of Denmark. Now, if you just look at the raw, totally unadjusted number for second-generation non-Western immigrants, you see a comparison ratio of 3.45. That is a big overrepresentation, especially next to the 0.90 for rooted Danes. This is the kind of number that makes headlines. But watch what happens when we adjust for just one of those factors we talked about, age. We know that crime is way more common among young men, and immigrant groups are often younger on average. So when you control for that, the CR for immigrants drops from 3.45 all the way down to 2.42. Just like that, the gap gets a lot smaller. And now for the final adjustment. Let's also control for socioeconomic status. We'll use income as a proxy. The CR drops again, this time to 2.05. Now a gap is still there for sure, but here's the kicker. A massive chunk of that scary headline number had nothing to do with where someone's parents were from. It was explained by age and income. Context is everything.
Legal status is another huge piece of the puzzle. If you're an unauthorized immigrant and you can't get a legal job, crime might start to look like one of your only options. We've actually seen this play out in real life. In both Italy and the US, when large groups of unauthorized immigrants were given legal status, crime rates in those communities went down. Why? Because people suddenly had access to real jobs and opportunities. Okay, so let's zoom out a bit for our third section. We're going to go deeper here, looking at a historical explanation for crime patterns that can stick around for generations and even cross borders.
If we use homicide as a stand-in for overall crime, you see this incredible pattern. One region just jumps off the chart with the highest rates in the world, the Americas, and specifically Latin America and the Caribbean. This is a really important clue.
So, what's the deal here? What do these places have in common? Well, the argument is that it's not just about being poor or about inequality in general. It's about a very, very specific kind of inequality.
And this quote really nails the central idea. It's about an inequality that's built on race, something you can't escape because, well, you can't change how you look.
So the theory goes something like this. You start with the history of slavery or intense racial discrimination. That creates these massive roadblocks that make it hard for people to get ahead for generations. For some people in those marginalized groups, crime can start to look like the only way to get money and respect. And over time, cultural attitudes can develop that justify that activity, and those attitudes can be passed down. You see this pattern not just in the Americas, but also with groups that have similar histories, like the Roma people in Europe.
But, it's not just about where people come from. The country they arrive in, that matters a lot. Let's see how in Section 4.
You can basically see two different models at play here. You've got island nations like the UK or Australia. They can control their borders more easily and tend to be more selective about who they let in. The result? Generally lower immigrant crime rates. Then you have the continental European countries. Especially in the Schengen free travel zone, it's much harder to control the borders, and that leads to totally different immigration patterns.
And if you want a perfect example of this in action, just look at Poland. It's amazing. When Poland joined the EU, travel restrictions loosened. And what happened? Between 2004 and 2008, crime inside Poland absolutely plummeted. And people felt it. The number of Poles who said they felt safe more than doubled. So where did the crime go? Well, the theory is that a good chunk of the criminal element just left. They moved to wealthier Western European countries where there was more to gain from crime.
This brings us to our last and maybe most important section, and it's all about a fundamental problem that's been hiding underneath this whole discussion: the data itself. The thing is, the very data we rely on is, well, it's messy. For one, crime stats are notoriously hard to compare from one country to another. Some countries, like France and Sweden, don't even collect data on the national origin of criminals because it's so politically sensitive. And maybe the biggest problem is that the data often throws long-term settled residents into the same bucket as mobile criminal gangs, which can completely distort the picture for an entire nationality.
And that leaves us with this really tough final question. When you don't collect this data, are you preventing stereotypes from forming? Or are you just creating an information vacuum, one that gets filled with rumors, speculation, and worst-case scenarios, maybe making the whole problem even worse? It's a classic catch-22, and there's no easy answer, which really sums up this entire complicated issue.